Hi, it's Trevor from Ostrich Longneck. In this video, I'd like to detail some parts of the build of the Terminator T2 vinyl kit from Horizon Models. I really wanted to light up the eyes on this kit, and it being a 1:5 scale model, luckily there was a lot of place for the simple electronics that I needed to install. The only thing that did put me off a little was the box art. It looks a little bit like a dissected toad, something from biology class. But when I looked at the parts, I could see that everything looked pretty much in scale and the details are really fantastic. So, without any further ado, let's get cracking.
Whoa, Robocop really did a number on you guys. I hope you learned a lesson from all of this. Be nice to your fellow toys.
Ouch! Ouch! E.T.
Huh?
Ouch!
Ha 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 ha.
Ouch! E.T. Phone home. Ouch!
The Terminator figure itself has relatively few parts, so I did a quick parts check to make sure that everything was there. Vinyl models often have quite a bit of a releasing agent present on the various parts, so the next step was to carry them off to the kitchen. A good scrub with warm water and dishwashing liquid is recommended for removing the releasing agent. However, the water should only be slightly warm, as hot water may damage the delicate parts. Vinyl is basically a pliable type of plastic, and the parts almost feel like they're made of a hard rubber. Smaller parts actually become deformed over time, especially if the model kit is a bit old, like this one. Luckily, it's a simple fix. Any parts which are a little warped can be warmed in hot water straight from the kitchen faucet, and then held in shape until cooled completely. The parts were rinsed thoroughly and left to dry. Next, I clamped all the parts Gundam style.
Oppan Gangnam Style!
No, not like that. Yes, like that. Would you guys please stop with the photobombing already? All the parts are pinned upright and ready for their base coat. Han, stop that! For the base coat, I used Alclad Gloss Black. This is the best way to bring out the shine in subsequent metal coats. I applied it undiluted using an airbrush. It adhered to the parts perfectly, and after 2 light coats the priming was done. The only downside to using Alclad is that it takes several days to dry on the resin parts, but it dries with an amazing shine. For the metal coat, I used AK True Metal aluminium paint. It squeezes from a tube and can be diluted for brush painting or airbrushing, after which it can be buffed up to a shine. I decided to do things a little differently, however, and applied it directly to the various parts of the kit using a polishing cloth. My thinking was that I would achieve an effect similar to dry brushing, where the recessed areas would remain dark but the raised areas would receive a thin metal coat. Thankfully, the technique worked quite nicely, although it did leave my fingers looking somewhat Terminator-like in the process. I started on smaller, more obscure parts first, but as I gained confidence in the method, I progressed onto larger and more complicated pieces. As I mentioned before, the details of the kit are amazing, and highly detailed areas such as the hands, feet and skull benefited from this unorthodox wipe-on method the most. A good base coat makes all the difference to a great metal shine. However, I can highly recommend the True Metal range as a means to achieve that shine. To clean my hands, I used some odorless turpentine, and the silver fingers were soon back to normal. In retrospect, I guess a pair of latex gloves would probably have been a good investment on my part. The very first vinyl to be trimmed was on the base of the skull. This was to allow easier access for fitting the LEDs for the eyes. I drilled holes for the eyes and decided to use red 2mm water tower LEDs in the circuit. Once fitted, they proved to be a few millimeters too long. I marked off the excess using a black marker pen and filed the LEDs down to the correct length. I polished them with the 3600 grit micromesh polishing cloth and made sure they fit into the eye sockets the way they were supposed to. I found the best place to grip the LEDs was on their power leads, just below their base. The final result did not look too bad, even up close. The plan was to run the circuit for the eyes of a couple of 3-volt batteries. Last year I purchased some neat cases for these batteries off eBay for this very purpose. They have a built-in on-off switch, but I plan to use a separate micro switch for this purpose. I would have to remember to make sure the battery case would be in the on position in the final circuit. For now, I moved it to the off position. The circuit was simple enough. I connected the two LEDs in series, positive to negative, and the negative leg of the second LED to the ground rail using a 100 ohm resistor. I proceeded to plug the negative lead from the batteries into the ground rail and the positive to the positive leg of the first LED. That's all there is to it. The LEDs burned with a bright red glow, too brightly in fact, but I planned to give the eyes a final coat of red paint which would tone down the brightness to a large degree. Before assembly, I laid all the parts out exactly according to instruction. The part numbers were printed on the excess vinyl, which would be cut away prior to assembly, and I didn't want to accidentally glue arms or legs on backwards. Come to think of it, that might be a build for another time. The parts which needed to be trimmed were marked in grey in the instructions. I laid down the parts for the right arm first. In order to trim the vinyl, I needed the right tool for the job. No, I don't think so. The vinyl has a lot of give and some parts are almost springy, so a brand new X-Acto blade was best suited to this job. The choice of glue was a very difficult one. Initially, I thought of using contact adhesive, the kind one uses to mend the soles of shoes, as this seemed to match the pliability of the vinyl. But, on second thought, cleanup would be a nightmare. I did some more research and found that CA glue was recommended by most modelers. It wasn't my first choice, but in the end it worked out just fine, especially after using the gel type CA glue with the old sprinkling of baking soda trick to literally weld the parts together. The main thing to remember is to clean off the excess immediately, as the combination sets rock hard and is difficult to file away later. Quite a lot of drilling is required on this model. The first time was the insertion of hydraulics in the thighs. A small hole is drilled in an area of the thigh which is marked quite clearly, and the part is inserted and glued into place. Unfortunately, this means that the model's legs are stuck into whichever position you've decided on, and not posable like the arms. 2 hydraulic pipes, which are actually cut-offs of a tiny, tightly coiled spring included in the kit, are glued to the shoulders and into the chest area. The shoulder part was easy, but the chest proved more difficult, until I drilled a couple of holes and inserted 2 brass rods at the correct angles. I wanted the head to be removable should it ever be necessary to access the electronics, so I glued 2 more brass rods in the neck area. A rubber pipe, also included in the kit, easily slipped on and off these rods. Similarly, 2 holes were drilled into the base of the skull, and brass rods glued into place. The pipe was cut into 2 smaller pieces, and these were permanently glued to the rods protruding from the skull. Using a sharp X-Acto knife, I cut out a piece of vinyl from the back of the figurine to serve as a cover for the area which will house the battery and excess wire. Next, I cut out a hole in the cover into which the microswitch could be fitted. The LEDs were finally glued into the eye sockets using CA glue and a quick bit of baking soda to prevent discoloration of the LEDs. They were light blocked by brush painting several coats of black paint on them. Their wires were passed through 2 holes drilled into the neck at the robot's eye level, and the head was finally assembled. The switch was soldered into the circuit and glued into the hole in the back panel. I wanted to hold the back panel into place using magnets, but the magnets I had were too powerful. I cut 2 styrene I-beams to fit and glued a magnet behind each. This lessened the magnetic attraction a little and made for a better fit of the back panel. I painted the teeth a dark brown, then mixed off-white and dark brown to paint in the details. I did not want the teeth too white because this wouldn't look natural.
Smokin'!
Once dry, I gave the teeth 3 coats of varnish for a shiny appearance and painted the eyes red. After testing the circuit, it was time for the final touch-ups. Using Tamiya gloss black, I painted some details into the metal finish. It's an old painter's trick. In order to make something appear brighter, you need to have lots of dark shadows around it. In this case, I merely wanted to augment what was already there. Some areas needed to appear more recessed, so when painting I used more black in the upper part of those areas and less on the lower, giving the illusion of more depth to those parts. I also darkened the panel lines and added more shadows everywhere. The Terminator T2 Judgement Day vinyl kit from Horizon was a fun kit to build. It had several challenges, many of which needed unique solutions. This, of course, was where all the fun was. It's beautifully detailed and nicely molded. and I would most certainly recommend this kit to anyone looking for something different from the norm. Well, that's it from me and my new shiny buddy. So long, and thanks for watching.